Hello, everybody. How's everybody doing? Good morning. Happy to begin the day, and thank you for uh, being up for a small performance this early in the daytime. I think this is y'all know I really want to be here to do an early morning singing. The voice is not built for that, but we're gonna do the best we can. You know, that's a good point. He said it's 1 p.m. All right, we're not gonna talk about that. I'm very honored to be here and to be a part of this community. I'm just gonna play a few songs for you. This first song is called "Holding So." Strength has a name today. She is a child of God, even when locked away. She's still so sure that you won't let her down. Sings as she prays for you. What a sound, all that she made it through. Hold and still, I can get well while you hold me. Still lonely, only cold things. They moved my court date, I can't afford that. I say the Lord's Prayer. I've been through more than you could imagine in 20 birthdays. I want a quiet life in a flat with church on a Sunday. I got a voice and I got a laugh and I'll use it one day. For now, please just hear me out. I am speaking through bars and writing your cards and keeping count. I know God ain't leave me. I'm friends with patience, all amounts. Till that moment I freeze and I keep on waiting till they count me. Holding cell, I can get well while you hold me. Still lonely, only cold things. La, 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 la. Thank you very much. That piece was written based on a series of letters between myself and collaborating artists that participate in an organization I run called the Healing Project. One of them is incarcerated in the state of Maryland, and the other one was being held at a detention center in Arizona. And just thinking about this particular moment, I wanted to start with that song because thinking about the importance of how we show up as a Black community in this moment, the solidarity that we have with people going through the immigrant crisis right now and the issues with all the racism happening in regards to an immigration detention system, I think is very critical. These structures, as we know, are deeply connected. I'm going to continue with a song of mine that's called Masculinity. And this piece was inspired by the Bell Hooks book entitled We Real Cool. Mike's always loved to do this to me. Young man, come down from that tower. It isn't yet your time. I'll tell you 5 years later, you made it out alive. Blame game's gonna lead to that pill. For real, it's such a thrill. You might get lost in the darkness. I'm sensing so much anger. Where do you put it all? You made best friends with danger. It lives inside your walls. Someone's catching it tonight. You lose your pride. You let it rain down on them. Show your heartless. 'Cause you're a man. It's what you do, and it don't matter what you've been through. Yeah, you're a weapon. Yeah, you're a gun. You ain't no father. You ain't no son. You might be canvas. You might be paint. Just hide that damage. It fade away. Yeah, you're a menace. Play out your role and loop that record and lose on the count of 3. Am I gonna hurt somebody? If I feel these things, is it gonna hurt me? On the count of 3, I can feel my heart is running. If I let it sing a sting, will it just erase me? Masculinity. Don't let me fall. Don't let me fall. Oh, don't let me fall. Oh, don't let me fall. Oh, don't let me fall. Thank you very much. I'm gonna play one more piece. I guess I should also say my name is Samora Pinderhughes. Lovely to meet you all, those who I don't know, and to see some wonderful faces of people who I love very deeply. Thank you. And I'll play one more song. This is a piece of mine that's entitled Process. There's some things that I don't want to admit, so I try not to think about it. So there's a lot of ugly things in my heart. I just hope to the Lord I don't slip. You feel me? Said there's some things that I don't want to admit, so I try not to think about it. There's a lot of ugly things in my heart. I just hope to the Lord I don't slip. I wonder what it's like to let it out, that part of me that I'm so afraid of. It holds on me and tosses me about. Doesn't seem to be something I get away from. Tell me, how do you name those well-kept secrets that you never say out loud? And why does the body see these demons but keep me from calling out? I guess I'll just say it's a process, one day at a time. There have been weeks when I already lost it. But I came back every time. So there's a whole entire world created in my mind. And it's so much more real than the one I see outside. I've populated it with people who can see that I'm no good, and who know all the best places where I can go to hide. And I'm haunted by the ghost of my best friend who just left me to head to the next world. But I'd like to believe it's the West End with a room full of art and his best girl. And it's positive that I could feel him, but I don't know if I took advantage of the times he was right in that next room, cause my pain was such I couldn't stand. Tell me, how do you name those well-kept secrets that you never say out loud? And why does the body see these demons but keep me from calling out? I guess I'll just say it's a process, one day at a time. There have been weeks when I already lost it, but I came back every time. When you ask me what's wrong, you might think I don't hear you, but that's not the case. I just might not respond. I don't want to be near you because I'm so ashamed. I'll just keep the TV on and just let it wash over all of these many fears, and hope I wake up less weary tomorrow morning. And hope I wake up less weary tomorrow morning. Please, God, hope I wake up less weary tomorrow morning. I guess I'll just say it's a process, one day at a time. There have been weeks when I already lost it. There have been weeks when I already lost it. But I came back every time. Thanks so much. Y'all have a beautiful rest of your day. Honored to be in community. Thank you.
Thank you, Sasan here. Thank you, Samora Pinderhughes, for that luminous opening. Your music carries us into this day with tenderness and fire, reminding us that art itself is a form of prophecy. Let's give him another round of applause. So good afternoon. My name is Tavia Nyong'o. For those who don't know me, I'm the curator of the public program here at the Park Avenue Armory. Welcome to Black Theater Advance, co-presented with the National Black Theater. This gathering continues more than a decade of work around NBT's Catalyst report, which is asking how Black theater might not only endure, but flourish as a central artery of our cultural life. Today, we extend those conversations and visioning exercises into a moment, a national moment of both peril and possibility for art. Here at the Armory, the Making Space public program has been taking a leaf out of civil rights legend Grace Lee Boggs' playbook this year and asking, what time is it on the clock of the world? I repeat Boggs' invocation to you. What time is it on the clock of the world? What time is it on the clock of your world? Are you anxious? Are you expectant? Are you determined? What time is it? The answer, as always, depends on us, on the risks we are willing to take, on the truths we are willing to tell, and on the solidarity we are willing to practice. I want to acknowledge 6 remarkable artists: Ifa Bayeza, Sage Crump, you can bring the applause up whenever you feel like it, India Haggins, Patricia McGregor, please stand if you're in the room, Stevie Walker-Webb, and Adrian Warren. Who have all been co-commissioned by the Armory and National Black Theater to write manifestos for Black theater's future. They are on the cover of your programs, and their bios are in the program, and they are with us today. Please, thank you again for being present and for bringing your full self to what is going to be a really exciting day. Thank you all for being here and for reminding us that our future is embodied among us. I also, a couple more thanks, and then we'll get the show on the road. I need to thank everyone at the Armory who's worked tirelessly for more than a year to make this happen, and in particular, my Associate Director, Darian Suggs. Is Darian in the room? For whom I was mistaken earlier today, which is understandable because all your emails came from Darian, so you know that without him, today would not have been possible. From the very first meeting, planning this event, Darian has been a thought partner and an expert manager of people, of budgets, of payroll. Please join me in recognizing Darian. Where is he? Hiding as well. Busy doing work, right? Okay. And then finally, without further ado, I'm so proud to stand here today on this podium and throughout the day with Sade Lythcott, caring for Dr. Barbara Ann Tier's vision, and with Jonathan McCrory, whose curatorial leadership has brought us to this day. I feel like we've lived so often on Zoom and in calls that I relish all the more the time that we get to steal away in face-to-face fellowship. So thank you for being here, and thank everyone on the National Black Theater staff and fam, especially those who traveled to be a part of this circle today. I hope we will be able to gather soon to raise a glass to your new permanent home on 125th Street. For today, let us lean into the unknown and allow what unfolds to change us. And with that, I invite Jonathan to introduce our first keynote.
Hi, everybody. Are we going to do a little bit better? Hello, everybody. That is the tradition of being Black and doing things Blackly. We do call and response like nobody else's business. And this whole day is about building on that call and that respond. You saw the call when we said, welcome to Black Theater Advance, and you responded by showing up. Showing up early, showing up on time, showing up to be witnessers, showing up to receive. And we hope that through this evening, through this time that we get to spend with each other, which is sacred, that you decided to count your time with us, that you will pour with ears wide open, hearts ready to receive, and feet grounded in some truth that allow for us to reckon with what does it mean to create the permanence for Black theater, and who are the new vanguard that need our resources, our time, our energy today. And so to help us do that, because it's going to be a lot, and everybody's gonna have lots of ideas, and we all love lots of ideas, and we love everyone's thinking, right? So help us do that call and response in a responsible way, because we can't go past 7, is we have these beautiful index cards that we partnered with Park Avenue Armory to create. Oh, yep, on the front it looks like this. On the back it has lines. I think it's what's really important about the index card and what's really important about where you are and how you're gonna participate today, because this will be active. You won't just be sitting in your seats. There are workshops to get us thinking around what is our ecosystem looking like. There are workshops to help us thinking. What are the Bill of Rights could look like for Black theater? You all are gonna help to shape that. And all of that good juju, all of that knowledge, all of these index cards that you pour your energy into help to feed a report that National Black Theater has been cultivating ever since we did our convening in December of 2023 at the Ford Foundation. So big shout out to the Ford Foundation, to Darren Walker for supporting this kind of gathering that we've been doing. And ultimately, we are doing this report to really help to synthesize and reckon with what does it mean to support, sustain, and uplift Black work and working Blackly today. How can individuals, how can people who work in philanthropy, how can people who are practitioners, how can future curators, future practitioners really think about where they're positioned and where they need to be positioned in order for us to have a future where our culture is centered and not capitalized on, but rooted in its liberation. So I'll stop there because I want to give a lot of great space to Sade Lythcott, our beautiful CEO, our amazing CEO who has helped to be a co-conspirator in this. Sade and I have been working on this project for over 12, 15 years.
Yeah, since 2012.
Since 2012, together, we have been trying to figure out how to maneuver, how to not even mastermind, how to navigate the terrain of what does it mean to actually support the ecology of Black theater. A caveat that I think is really beautiful, and I do want to uplift his name, Michael Dimwitty, is that in 2012, when Sade and I brought a group of people together, Michael Dimwitty was one of those people on our advisory board for the original Catalyst. Me and him, we actually did a survey, because in 1968, there were over 200 Black theater troupes and companies in New York City alone. And in 2013, there was only 86 in the country. So that means that there's an exodus, there's a resource dearth, there is something that's happening, and what was that resource dearth? What was that thing that was happening that was not allowing for those 200 companies now to be maybe 2,000, or to be flourishing spaces that have multiple venues that they own or operate or navigate? So this is about the continuation of that legacy work, the continuation of folks like Michael Dimwitty, who is a great ancestor at this juncture, who are shining down on us to help us really find out and reckon with that very, very important question. Without further ado, Sade Lythcott.
If y'all know us, you know the worst thing that anyone could ever do is follow Jonathan McCrory. Can I get an amen? Okay. So let's just jump into it. It's going to be an exciting day, as Jonathan said. We're really excited about publishing a paper, not just a report, that maps the last 15 years of Black theater making and our landscape. I think the thing that feels very exciting about this moment is that we recognize that this is not a static conversation, that when we talk about the future, it must be informed by the shoulders in which we stand. The shoulders in which I stand, who I will name in this room, who has already been named, as Dr. Barbara Ann Tier, founder of National Black Theater, a visionary Black woman who understood that the power of storytelling can and does shape the world. And that if storytelling in theater is the most powerful medium on the planet, because it's not about applause, it's about alignment, could we point that power specifically and intentionally to our community? That it's okay that we are the biggest export of entertainment in the world, but what if all of that power and resources got pointed to our own communities? And so that's the experiment. That is what Catalyst maps. We also know in this era of cultural erasure, if you don't publish it, and you guys have to hear this as a Black community because we are oral people, which is a beautiful thing. But if we don't publish it, if we don't exist in matter, we will not matter. So a part of Black Theater Advance is that we're mapping today as a part of the report will inform a paper that will be published that will map from 2013 until this present moment. I want to shout out Nadia in the audience, who is a fabulous writer. If anybody saw that article in The Cut New York Magazine about the women who run Harlem, Nadia wrote it. She is auditing today to add all of your questions that are on the cards in these papers to that paper, so that this is really a generative conversation that is informed by the past, the present, and of course the future. But my job today is gives me goosebumps because it is to introduce our first keynote speaker. And when I was just very quickly writing notes for the introduction, I started to weep. I won't do it now, because introducing this powerhouse this force of nature is the honor of a lifetime. And once I begin to introduce her, if you don't know Dr. Mary Schmidt Campbell, you will know that so much of our lives are responsible because of her vision and leadership over the last 50 years. So it is my honor to welcome a woman whose extraordinary career, spanning almost 50 years, has been defined by vision, tenacity, and the unshakable commitment to building permanence for cultural institutions. Dr. Mary Schmidt Campbell is an art historian, an educator, a scholar, and a cultural leader whose impact has shaped both the arts and higher education in this country. She began her career as the executive director of the Studio Museum in Harlem, where she transformed a fledgling idea into the powerhouse we know today. Under her leadership, the museum secured its permanent home on 125th Street, a milestone that anchored the institution in Harlem's cultural life. The same building, now being reimagined through the leadership of Thelma Golden, will reopen on November 15th as one of the most important cultural landmarks of our time. And that was just her first job. Okay. She went on to serve as New York City's Commissioner of Cultural Arts, first Black woman, okay, under 2 mayors, becoming the city's chief advocate for artists and cultural institutions. For more than 2 decades, she guided one of the most influential training grounds for artists as the dean of NYU's Tisch School of Arts, as Tavia remarked. And in 2015, she became the 10th president of Spelman College, where she fortified its global reputation for excellence and secured the largest single gift in the college's history, a transformational $100 million investment in the future of Black women's leadership. Across every chapter of her career, Dr. Campbell has modeled what it means to be a steward of legacy. Woo. And a builder of permanence. I can't imagine the trenches stories, but we'll get into that in her talk, in our conversation to follow. Ensuring that Black excellence is not only celebrated, but endowed with the infrastructure and vision to endure. On a personal note, Dr. Campbell was both a friend and a colleague of my mother, Dr. Barbara Ann Tier, during her years leading Studio Museum. She has been a supporter of NBT and in many ways a guiding example of the kind of leadership and devotion. That's why I get emotional. The level of devotion for a half a century to your people. And to defy all the odds. I think probably her favorite word is no, because it's such an invitation to say yes. And so for me, It is a profound honor to welcome her to this stage and to express my deep gratitude for her unwavering commitment to the institutions that safeguard and advance our culture. Please help me welcome Dr. Mary Schmidt Campbell.
Well, good afternoon. I will tell you, first of all, Jonathan, where are you? Jonathan, your voice, your music, your words, I mean, moved me just beyond the horizon. So thank you for that. And Sade, you had me crying out there. So I'm going to try to get myself together so I can start this conversation here. So when Tavia invited me to give a keynote for the event, I thought he made a mistake. Because I said, like, I'm an art historian, right? And even my husband said, what do you know about Black theater? And he's right. Never once in my career have I been part of a theatrical production or worked in a theater, nor have I engaged in the kind of exquisite scholarly research that Tavia and Nyong'o does. And surrounded by so many innovative theater artists like Sade, Lythcott, and Jonathan McCrory, I am truly humbled to be up here this afternoon. I did share with Tavia, however, I love theater. I mean, I'm passionate about theater. When the lights go down and I'm sitting there in the audience, my iPhone is turned off, and you know, the daily life has dissolved around me, that's when I feel I'm really slipping into the lives of the characters who are on that stage. And I've been in the worlds of some of the world's greatest artists, you know, from any number of countries and cultures and time periods. But very often, when I'm in the theater and I'm watching something written by a Black playwright, I always feel there's like a little coded message just for me. You know, I feel like in the words of Lorraine Hansberry, that it's bestowing, what does she say, quote, sighted eyes and feeling heart. But I'm not here today because I love theater. I'm here because for the past nearly 50 years, I've had the privilege in participating in institution building. And I've learned a thing or two. I've learned that the task of building permanence never ends. It continues from one generation to the next. And it's not just about our Black theaters, it's about our Black museums and dance companies and community art centers. We have to get very serious about what we need in order to thrive into the future. And so we're here today to determine how to assemble the assets, and I use that word very deliberately, the assets we need to build permanence. How do we support our artists? What does an institutional environment need to provide for those who work in our organizations? How do we safeguard the intellectual capital that we make possible? Is there a way for that creative and intellectual capital to contribute to permanence? And how do we accumulate and grow the financial capital necessary for permanence? Before I get to the heart of my keynote, I do want to share with you the story of how I was awakened to the power of Black theater and why I feel so strongly about its permanence and preservation. In the fall of 1971, I experienced my first example of Black theater. Melvin Van Peebles opened Ain't Supposed to Die a Natural Death on Broadway with book, lyrics, and music all by Mr. Van Peebles. The musical ran for 9 months until June of 1972, earning several Tony nominations. Unconventional in form and content, the work was composed of 19 monologues, each delivered in a style that mixed a little Gil Scott-Heron and The Last Poets. Van Peebles has said that each of the 19 scenes represented was from the perspective of someone who was sitting on a wooden fruit crate on a corner in the hood. What I remember is that on stage, there was an entire world. That world was brought to life under the direction of Gil Moses, who had assembled a community of brilliant theater artists. The costume, light, and set designers, for example, recreated the decimation of so many Black urban landscapes of that era, but recreated it as if it were viewed through a mirror of the surreal. A procession of outstanding art actors followed one after another on stage, each with a story to tell about desire, or the way the world had assaulted them, pleasured them, enchanted or entrapped them. A band on stage punctuated and underscored each narrative with a musical idiom that conjured a little gospel and blues overlaid with jazz. The effect was electrifying. The music's creative energy, the creative energy of the entire production, the artistry of it, was locked in a death match struggle with the destructive forces narrated by the characters. Traditional theater critics like Clive Barnes of the New York Times didn't know what to make of the work. He called it like visiting a foreign country. For me, the piece was brutally truthful, honest, pulling no punches about the neighborhood in which I grew up. Several years later, after savoring the works of many more playwrights, I could see that there are as many ways of making Black theater as there are Black playwrights and theater artists. And I continue to this day to revel in the rich diversity. Yet for all of its diversity, there is a common thread. Whether it's Beneatha Younger expressing the defiance of her ambitions as a Black woman, or Zoo Man speaking to us directly, making us come face to face with his insouciant cruelty in Charles Fuller's Zoo Man and the Sign, or the slick as oil wordsmithing of a traveling preacher looking for justice in Ossie Davis's Pearly Victorious. What I came to learn was that Black theater is one of our most potent forms of public truth-telling. It's a truth-telling that is not only open and honest, but like Malcolm X on the corner of 125th and Lenox with a bullhorn, compelled by moral clarity and directed not only to us, but to the world at large. There's another aspect of the power of Black theater, and that is of Black cultural institutions, and that is placemaking. I learned this aspect of Black theater when I came to Harlem in 1977 as executive director of the Studio Museum. And Barbara Ann Tier was Sade very kindly said that we were friends. I look way up to her. I mean, she was royalty, absolute royalty. She was one of my heroes. She was the founder in 1968 and artistic director for 40 years of National Black Theater. And she made a compelling case for why Black theaters and Black cultural centers in general needed to have their own space in a 1968 New York Times op-ed piece. And this is what she wrote, and I quote, "Up to now, the Negro artist has been totally concerned with integration, with finding a place for his creative talents in the existing theater." She goes on to insist, "We must begin building cultural centers where we can enjoy being free, open, and Black, where we can find out how talented we really are, where we can be what we were born to be, not what we were brainwashed to be." At the Studio Museum, I had the great honor of sharing a building at 2033 Fifth Avenue with NBT. We may not have used exactly the same language as Barbara Ann Tier, but many of the other cultural institutions in Harlem at the time shared exactly the same sentiment she expressed so boldly. Black cultural institutions need their own home. Proprietorship, and this is a really important point, that proprietorship began in the 1970s with when the Harlem School of the Arts moved out of the basement of the church, and Dorothy Maynor and then Betty Allen established that. That was in the 1970s. The Studio Museum in Harlem acquired a building on 125th Street in 1980. Percy Sutton, former Black borough president of Manhattan, assembled a group of investors to purchase the Apollo in 1981, and Ms. Tier would purchase the 65,000 square foot building on 125th and Fifth Avenue in 1983. Just think of that. All of that activity going on in terms of acquiring our own space. And of course, further uptown, Dance Theater of Harlem was also acquiring its space. Each of those organizations continues to contribute mightily towards the physical restoration, because you have to remember in 1977, New York City and Harlem physically were shot, just crumbling. But part of the physical restoration of our neighborhood, of our community, resides, the responsibility resides with our Black cultural institutions. And not just building buildings, building beautiful buildings. Buildings of architectural richness and design that give character and quality and exude a sense of excellence up in our neighborhoods. We don't celebrate that enough. And I'm sorry, that's like a thing of mine, but we need to celebrate. That was a real accomplishment. But in doing that, we realized something. Getting your own home is just the first step, right? Because then you have to make sure that you maintain it and you keep it and it continues to grow and thrive. And over the years, if I look back over those 50 years, what I can see is that each of those institutions, each in their own way, sort of adhere to what I would call the pillars of permanence. And there are three of them. The first is the acquisition and development of human capital. Nothing is more important than that. Bricks and mortar are important, but nothing is as important as human capital. The second is the safeguarding of that intellectual capital that gets created. And the third is the preservation and growth of financial capital. So what I'm going to do now is kind of just share with you some experiences that I've had in each of those three areas in the amassing of these different assets that I think are necessary for our permanence. And starting with my own journey at the Studio Museum in Harlem, when I was hired, the trustees were very clear. We want an accredited fine arts museum. We want to build a permanent collection. We want to have publications. We want to be on the world stage. And I said to myself, well, yeah, I'm an art historian. I'm a curator. I can do that. Problem was, at the time of my hire, the museum resided in a rented loft with no heat in the winter or air conditioning in the summer. But what it did have was a growing deficit, fundraising that was floundering, and an overdependence on public grants. And what was even more scary, even though their new executive director could produce a well-researched exhibition catalog, she could barely tell the difference between a 501c3 and a 401k. I knew virtually nothing about governance, operational, or business or the financial side of the organization. Fundraising, essential to our survival, was a complete mystery. Permanence requires an investment in business and organizational competence. That was, I will just say, for me, I don't know how it is for others out there, for me, that was a very hard lesson to learn. But what I realized is that as hard as I might have studied to be an art historian and a curator, I had to study just as hard to understand financial management, to understand organizational structure. I actually even had my board hire a fundraising consultant for a year to help me understand what that was all about. But what was even more challenging is, okay, we wanted to be accredited fine arts museum. This is 1977. I could count on one hand the number of museum professionals there were in the entire country. How do you build a museum when you don't have that level of professional knowledge and experience? And what we decided is that for every single person who came to the Studio Museum in Harlem, there would be a whole professional development path for them, which to this day, 40 years later, continues at the museum. So hiring somebody and saying, let's see, I look at your background, I think you'd make a really great registrar, so we're going to send you to registrar school or curator. We sent one of our finest curators to the Smithsonian for several weeks to study the whole field of curatorship. But to this day, the Studio Museum in Harlem continues to be one of the chief producers of Black and people of color museum professionals, because it is part of the culture. And so part of our culture, of all of our institutions, has to be this constant ability to be the place that is going to pay attention to developing our leadership skills, our competency, and our professional skills. And it pays off. Kinshasa Conwell was my deputy director. She succeeded me as director. Pat Cruz was her deputy director. After serving with Kinshasa, she went on to become director of Harlem Stage. Thelma Golden, who is the museum director of museum directors, was my intern from Smith College when she came to the museum. So these places, this has an enormous power in and of itself when we take the responsibility of making sure that our people get the finest training possible. Another aspect of human capital is how we relate to our artists. And the museum has always, and long before I got there, had an artist in residence program. And we made this key, fundamental to the character and nature of what the museum was about. And that was to make sure that we had a new set of artists every year. They could serve for 9 months. Every artist got an exhibition at the end of their tenure. And there has been this extraordinary, again, stream of artists, Daoud Bey, Curry James Marshall, David Hammonds, just amazing artists that have come out of this program, because that has been, again, one of the priorities in terms of developing human capital. So one of the ironies of this, right, is that this generative aspect of human capital development sometimes seems to work against us. So we know that George Wolfe's first successful play, The Colored Museum, was mounted at Crossroads, a Black theater in New Brunswick, New Jersey. And we celebrate that. And we celebrate George's success as the leader of the public theater. Just as we celebrate, I see Ty sitting there, Carl Caulfield's Associate Artistic Director of Classical Theater of Harlem. And we celebrate his production of Pericles for the public theater. So we understand that this generative quality serves not only our institutions, but also has been feeding PWIs, particularly over the past 10 and 20 years. The problem, however, is why then do we sometimes feel that this generative quality that we nurture in our institutions feels so extractive, feels that we're, they're benefiting, and so what about me? What about us? And so that really brings me to the subject of fundraising. And that's something that I learned. I didn't learn as much as I could have at the Studio Museum in Harlem, but when I came to New York University, which is a powerhouse fundraiser, that's when I said, I'm going to take some lessons here. I'm going to learn what makes these guys so particularly successful. And here's my insights into fundraising. We spend an enormous amount of time pursuing donations, and we have to. We write letters, we hold galas, we put a little button on our website and says, donate here. The reality is that we cannot raise significant funds that at the level of investments unless we are cultivating deep and long-standing donor relationships. And it's an irony because everybody needs money and needs it now. And in fact, relationships take time. They have to be cultivated in time, and learning how to balance the urgency of going out and getting the donation and for this program or that program or from that, from your annual fund or what have you, versus taking the time to nurture that person who at the end of 10 years will make a significant investment, is something we really have to pay attention to. One more word about human, and I put that under the area of human capital, because I think what you're cultivating, people who believe in what you believe in. And when you're asking them for money, you're not really asking them because you need money, you're asking them for the money because you're fulfilling some meaning and purpose in their lives. And that's where the significant investments will come from. One more word about human capital, and that is our trustees. I see a lot of institutions who kind of go for the big sparkly name, or the person who is kind of the celebrity or whatever, and that's fine. But you need trustees who are believers, who believe as deeply as you and the people who work with you in your mission and your purpose, and who are willing to, they're volunteers, they work. They will do the work of being on your committees, of working to prepare your audit, of chairing your committees, or doing your helping you with your fundraising, being your ambassadors, being your influencers, being your connectors. Trustees who believe as deeply, they're like the donors. They are people who come and say, okay, maybe I don't have 10 or 15 or 20 million dollars to give, but I can give you my expertise and my competence. And so these are the whole areas of human capital that are just absolutely core. Without them, you can't have permanence. So the second pillar is intellectual capital and preserving memory. So Studio Museum started out, it was not a collecting museum, but it became clear that we didn't collect. Who else was going to be collecting the work of Black artists in 1977 and 1987? So almost by necessity, we had to start amassing that intellectual capital. It is imperative that organizations that are aiming towards permanence have some way either of preserving the artistic capital, preserving the history of their own institution, and if so, recognize that that's an enterprise in and of itself. At the Studio Museum, that was the case. At Spelman College, that was the case. Spelman College was late to the game in terms of setting up a museum, but they were extremely attentive about making sure that they had a defined collection policy, and in their case, it was Black women artists, makes sense. They have a small archive, but it is a meticulous archive. And Louis Messiah just did a magnificent documentary film on Toni Cade Bambara. How? Because he used the Spelman archives that are there on Toni Cade Bambara, which enabled that incredible creative artistic person to survive in yet another medium. So archives and preserving memory are extremely important. But what intrigues me is there an extent to which this intellectual capital might be used as financial capital? So the example that I give is that the Studio Museum in Harlem was trying to raise money for this new building. They went to their artists and said, please donate a piece that we can auction, which they did. They had a collection of pieces by artists, all of whom had an affiliation. They had either had a show at the museum, or they were in the collection. I mean, some way, they were artists in residence, some way they had some connections to the Studio Museum in Harlem. They raised $20 million from the auction of the works that the artists donated. And what happened, you could think, well, that's kind of taking advantage of the artists. What happened is, for many of the artists, their prices went up as a result of the auction. I don't have any solutions for Black theater off the top of my head, but it is something we need to think about, because our intellectual capital, creative capital, has could have enormous financial value. And how we manage that is something we need to think about in terms of permanence. Let me move on to yet another pillar, and that is financial. It's very interesting that I often hear people say, well, you know what? If we could only raise an endowment, it'd be great, and then that can help us with our financial management. Endowments, yes, do grow, they also plummet. And when I came to Spelman College, which is a exceedingly well-run organization financially, we learned that Moody's was going to, shortly after I got there, was going to downgrade us because they felt that although we were producing balanced budgets, if they looked out into the future 10 years, they couldn't project the kind of financial strength that we would need to remain permanent. That meant that our CFO, the board chair, the new president, all the financial staff had to sit down and completely rethink the business model for this 140-year-old college. We realized we had to constrict our budget radically in order to build a reserve fund. We had to get another source of earned income other than tuition. You can't keep raising tuition forever because pretty soon your students aren't going to be able to afford to come. So that's not going to work. So we had to get another. We had to make a number of fairly radical changes to the business model, even though we were 140 years old. And which we were able to do. It was painful. People don't like to have their budgets cut. It's not pleasant to say, well, you know, we're not going to have any salary raises for the next 2 years. Do not like to hear that. But it put the college in a position of extraordinary health, just as COVID came to our door. So the notion then of permanence and financial stability is not something that you do once and forever. You're doing it all the time. You're rethinking, you're looking at the environment, you're understanding the environment, you're making those changes. And even as you're being the most prudent, you know, things happen. Funding gets pulled, pledges don't materialize, the roof leaks, costs soar, all kinds of things happen. So this notion of permanence, which we need, is something which requires our vigilance and our ongoing efforts. So I'm going to stop there and say there's a lot more that I can say about each of these pillars, but I'm going to have a terrific conversation with Sade. So I'm going to end with the words of one of my favorite authors, James Baldwin. My father gave me a copy of The Fire Next Time when I was about 17 years old, and I love it. I still read it to this day. And my favorite essay is My Dungeon Shook, Letter to My Nephew on the 100th Anniversary of the Emancipation. And in it, Baldwin advises his nephew and namesake, James, what it means as a Black person to be a part of this country. And to this day, his advice rings true and provides the best argument for the collective permanence of Black theater. And I quote, "We, with love, shall force our brothers to see themselves as they are, to cease fleeing from reality and begin to change it." Baldwin goes on to give this advice to his nephew. "For this is your home, my friend. Do not be driven from it. Great men have done great things here and will again. And we can make America what America must become." Thank you.
How y'all doing? Was this not a master class? I hope everyone is using the pens that are outside and the pencils that are outside. Thank you.
Is this on?
Yes.
Okay.
So I want to dive right in.
Okay.
And thank you for a master class of what I think a lot of us back into. And your pillars of permanence are actually a blueprint. And if you don't do anything, go home and study these 3 pillars, because I think that so many of us who run institutions kind of have done it on the job training. what you have experienced, you know, putting it into a 20-minute talk is life-changing for many of us who are trying to navigate permanence. So as we talk about these pillars, I'm curious, what role does the ecosystem play, your colleagues, in what it means to create a permanence?
Yeah, thank you for raising that up. Well, first of all, to have someone like Barbara Ann Tier make that bold statement on our behalf. I mean, she really was, as I said, we may not have worded it exactly that way, but she made that statement in such an emphatic way that articulating that desire, I think, was important for us. And then when we all started to build something, we used to, when I was there, we used to get together just casually. So it'd be Betty Allen and maybe Arthur Mitchell and Barbara Ann Tier. Now I understand from Thelma that there actually were periodic luncheons for people to come together. You probably know about that. But, you know, they seem kind of like just social. They're absolutely essential because they are affirmations of where we have been and where we need to go. And also they're very, in a very practical sense, places where we exchange, they're the public squares, places where we exchange information. And I know, again, I'm going to point to Ty, but again, Harlem School of the Arts is a little further north than obviously than the 125th Street corridor, but now there's a cluster of cultural organizations, you know, incubating there that have been incubating for several years. So it's been really fascinating to see how generative we have been over the several decades and continue to be.
Yeah, I think the ecosystem in recognizing each other and meeting with each other and understanding each other's challenges, I think has offered such a lifeline to so many of us, especially in times where there are very clear external conflicts or external threats. Let's stay on that conversation for a second around being a generative space. You said so eloquently in your talk about generative spaces being spaces of incubation, and that a part of the role and responsibility of the institution is to have pipelines of workforce development and encourage the folks that are coming in and the artists that start with us to go out into the world. My question to you is, how do we create a holistic cycle that comes back home? So if we are intentionally a pipeline and an incubator, so much of, as you point out, our power, our superpower, is really tapping into that individual donor, that support base that knows us and is us. So that has been, I think, probably the biggest challenge when you talk about the percentages. If we look at our institutions, we're probably heavily dependent on institutional funders. What would you say is there a key to unlocking the individual donor, but more than that, the invitation as a generative space for folks to come back home, not only just to see a production, but to really support?
So, you know, when there's a partnership, particularly, that's one way in which, you know, our institutions very often relate to PWIs. We form partnerships. You know, the road has to go both ways. You know, it can't always be that I'm going to, as an institution, contribute to the well-being or the event or exhibition at your space. There has to be some reciprocity. And again, an example of that is that when the Studio Museum had to close, and for almost 2 years to build a building, they forged a relationship with the Museum of Modern Art that basically had the museum hosting their exhibitions during that 2-year time. So there's an understanding that a collaboration means that both parties stand to gain. And I think that's just something we have to be just, you know, very vigilant about how we structure those relationships and those partnerships. And again, And I'm sorry, Ty, for keep pointing at you.
He
But,
said that for that reason.
but I wanted to go see Pericles, but it was here for, what, a week?
Oh, Memnon.
Barely a week. That was crazy. Yeah. Barely a week. And so that, that doesn't give you much time. So if I were negotiating, and I'll be very honest, I sit on the board of the Public Theater, right? Right? And I'm about to sit on the board of Classical Theater of Harlem, right? Okay. So if I were saying that here's a really fair collaboration, it would be in Marcus Garvey Park as well. I mean, because there has to be something for everyone in the collaboration. Everybody has to be enriched by a partnership. That and that just kind of is square one.
Yeah, I think that is absolutely the case. And one of the things that I think MBT, Jonathan and I in particularly are always trying to do, which was so wonderful to hear about your 3 pillars. Our 4th pillar is cultural capital.
Yes.
And oftentimes in these partnerships, you have to point to cultural capital as a real currency in order to strike these partnerships that are seated in much more equity, and not just equity, but equality. In our partnership with the Public Theater, when we produced and developed Fat Ham, I remember those spirited debates. And the fundamental question was, our investment into the piece was 100% of what we would spend on a main stage, which is a fraction of the cost that the public spends on a main stage. And so the question to Oscar and Patrick was, when those percentages are always equated to financial capital, we asked the question, why is your 100% worth more than mine? Fundamental question.
Yep.
It's all capital. It's all a currency. Why is your 100% worth more than ours? And I'll give it to people like Patricia McGregor and New York Theater Workshop, who we've also partnered with, that understand how valuable cultural capital is. And that when you actually do the math, whether it's new math or not, the partnership becomes much clearer around what everyone's role and responsibility is.
Yep.
But in that, the partnerships with our artists, let's just say as we're mapping Black theater's permanence, I think you strike a very important part, that the majority of Black theater today is made in white spaces. And as Jonathan noted, we have a fraction of Black spaces that we used to have, so partnership and equity is essential. But how do we get the artists back? How do we get the administrators, the curators that go on to be chief curators and directors of museums to give back? I think Studio Museum is a great example. When Lowry came back to run Studio Museum in the early 2000s, having come back from the Metropolitan Museum of Art.
So that's exactly the problem that the Studio Museum had. And the solution was actually almost simple. If I'm a young person and I go to a big organization, let's say the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and I'm an assistant curator, I'm going to be given tasks and assignments that are sort of commensurate with what my rank is at that museum. If you came to the Studio Museum and you were an assistant curator, you were going to be doing fundamental work that was necessary to get that catalog published or to get that exhibition on the wall. You were going to, the level of excellence was going to be, that was demanded, was going to be exactly the same as it would be any other place. But the kind of assignments and challenges you were given as a young person were enormous. And so young people would flock to the Studio Museum because they did real work. They did real creative work, real professional work. They worked on essays. They made a real contribution to the creative content in a way that it takes someone at a large hierarchical organization to kind of, spend time to go up the ladder to get those kinds of responsibilities. Now, there's a risk, because if you're really young and you're doing it for the first time, but there's also there's a reward. Kelly Jones worked on the chronology for my Harlem Renaissance book. She's a MacArthur Genius Awardee now. I mean, and that's that's what you want. You're looking for talent. You're always searching for that person who you think has it. Oh, I see her over there in the corner. I think you ought to be doing this. So I can't stress too much how proactive it is in terms of identifying the talent, giving them real opportunities, and really promoting excellence in them.
And the invitation to come back has to be explicit.
Absolutely.
I have a question. As I map your career, one of the things that is the most impressive is your kind of balanced approach to excellence and access. What role does, and raising over $300 million for a fund for Spelman, and, National Black Theater's Capital Campaign is at $100 million and growing now. These are not small checks. This is not small amounts. And the critique is, as you get bigger, you lose your connection to community, which is the lifeblood of an organization like National Black Theater that is in and of the people. My question is, how have you balanced that in your career, being able to reach these high heights, move towards permanence, but not lose your connectivity to the roots of the institution or higher learning?
I love that you've called attention to what I would call the porosity of our institutions. We're porous. I mean, when we were in the loft over the liquor store, the artists would just walk up the steps and walk into I could be just doing anything. They'd walk into my office, sit down and start talking, and if you listen to them, they would come up with some really unbelievable ideas that I never would have thought of. And so this ability to keep that porosity is important, and you have to find ways to do it. When I was at Spelman, I said, okay, there are 2,000 students. I can't go around and meet all of them, right? So I started a president's reading circle where every year 20 new students would come in. I'd pick a book, we'd read it together, and we had the most candid conversations. And then we'd go in the second semester, in the spring semester, it was in the fall semester. In the spring semester, we'd go to New York and see a play related. So we saw we read The Color Purple, and then of course went to see it on Broadway, but we also invited Alice Walker to speak to the whole school and then have lunch with him. Every year we had an experience like that. And so Brian Stevenson comes and we read the book, we go visit his museum, he comes and he has lunch with him, he comes, speaks to the whole. So I have more emails from the women who were in that president's reading circle, because I had to know, out of those 2,000 students, what's on their mind? What kind of music do they listen to? What's important in their lives? What's language are they using? You know what I mean? So every leader has to find a way to know their community and find a way to keep that communication open and alive.
So my last question, I have so many more questions, but I know we're at time, really is about, so in BT, I think we're in our 56th or 57th season. And
I've been married 57 years, but okay.
Another institution of permanence. And this season, this event kicks off our season, and our season theme is the alchemy of return. Remembering is a radical act. And as we think about memory and remembering, and you speak in your keynote about the importance of archive, intellectual capital, institutions, and cultural homes, can you speak to us in this moment in time of cultural erasure, of the landscape being as bleak as some might think it is, about the radical nature of remembering and why it's so important for cultural institutions to be institutions that collect, memory, that not only write stories about the future, but are vigilant about preserving the past as an act of radical activism?
Yeah, I love that question. It's long, but I said this on a call. We had a group call in preparation for this event, and I said we cannot afford to forget how resilient our culture has been. If you just date it back to the time of emancipation, right? From that time forward, if you think of the extent to which our culture has been so important, not only to us and not only to the country, but to the whole global culture, then you understand that we have demonstrated remarkable resilience, excellence, mastery, and excellence. And we sometimes, when I hear contemporary conversations, I hear a level of grievance that, in my view, diminishes what we've achieved. We can't forget that. That is what is going to allow us to continue to build, to continue to move forward. And so, to the extent that our institutions find their way to do that, I marvel at the fact that Thelma will still call me or email me to keep me abreast of what happened at an institution that I served 48 years ago. But Spelman will have, when they inaugurated their president, they had every single president who had ever served, who was still alive, up there on the stage. There's a way of celebrating our past that we have to retain, because we, as Baldwin said, we are a fundamental part of what this country has to become. Absolutely.
Thank you so
Thank
very
you.
much.